The air on the San Antonio Riverwalk was thick and sweet, a heavy blanket of early summer heat woven with the scent of blooming bougainvillea and sizzling Tex-Mex spices. Detective Martin, a man more accustomed to the wide-open spaces of southeast Texas, felt a familiar prickle of claustrophobia amidst the canyon-like walls of the river, the colorful umbrellas of the tour boats gliding silently below. At 51, he was a man of contrasts, his Czech accent a surprising melody against the backdrop of his adopted Texas home. Beside him, Tonya, his partner in life and logic, was already mentally cataloging the architectural details of their hotel, the fictional La Perla del Rio. At 43, she was a woman who found comfort in order, her sharp mind a perfect foil to Martin's intuitive leaps. This vacation was a compromise, a chance for Martin to indulge his love of fine food and for Tonya to immerse herself in the historical tapestry of a new city. As they stepped into the cool, marble-floored lobby of the hotel, they were blissfully unaware that they had just walked onto the stage of a tragedy, a drama of wealth, greed, and murder that was about to unfold. The Covington family was a Texas institution, a dynasty built on the black gold of the oil fields. At the head of this empire was Bartholomew Bart Covington, a man whose ruthlessness was as legendary as his fortune. He was a man who had clawed his way to the top, leaving a trail of broken partnerships and shattered dreams in his wake. His family, a collection of disparate souls bound by the golden chains of inheritance, orbited him like a constellation of resentful planets. There was his second wife, a woman young enough to be his daughter, her beauty a fragile mask for her ambition. There was his eldest son, a man who had inherited his father's ambition, but not his cunning. There was his estranged daughter, a woman who had dared to defy him by marrying for love. And there was his younger brother, a man who had lived his entire life in the shadow of his siblings' success. They were a family of vipers, their smiles as sharp as their knives, their affections as fleeting as the Texas wind. The news of Bart Covington's death rippled through the hotel like a shockwave, a sudden and violent disturbance in the tranquil waters of the river walk. He was found in his suite, a sprawling penthouse with a panoramic view of the city, his body sprawled on the floor near the open balcony doors. The scene was one of tragic simplicity: an old man, a little too much to drink, a careless step. The official ruling was accidental death, a verdict that was as convenient as it was comforting. The hotel staff breathed a collective sigh of relief. The Covington family put on their masks of grief, and the city of San Antonio prepared to mourn the passing of a titan. But in the quiet corners of the hotel, whispers began to circulate, rumors of a family at war, of a fortune up for grabs, of a death that was anything but accidental. Elena Ramirez was a young woman with a kind heart and a quiet ambition. As a concierge at the La Perla del Rio, she was a purveyor of dreams, a weaver of perfect vacation itineraries. She was the one who had arranged for the vintage bottle of scotch to be delivered to Mr. Covington's suite, the one who had taken his last gruff phone call. She was a small, insignificant player in the grand drama of the Covington family, a face in the crowd, a name on a duty roster. But in the aftermath of Bart Covington's death, she would find herself thrust into the spotlight, a pawn in a game she didn't understand, a suspect in a murder she didn't commit. Her life, once a carefully constructed symphony of order and routine, was about to descend into a cacophony of chaos and fear. In the sterile silence of the hotel's back office, Elena replayed the events of the previous night, her mind a frantic loop of what-ifs and if-onlys. She had received a call from Mr. Covington, his voice a low growl of impatience. He had demanded a specific brand of allergy medication, a rare and expensive one. The hotel's pharmacy was closed, but Elena, ever the diligent concierge, had managed to find a 24-hour pharmacy that carried it. She had arranged for a courier to deliver it to the hotel, and then, with her own hands, she had taken it up to the penthouse suite. But in her haste, in her eagerness to please the formidable Mr. Covington, she had made a mistake. She had grabbed the wrong bag from the courier, a bag containing a different medication, a medication that, when mixed with alcohol, could be fatal. It was a small mistake, a simple human error, but in the life and death of Bart Covington, it was everything. While the San Antonio police were content with the verdict of accidental death, Martin was not. He had managed to get a brief look at the crime scene photos, and something had snagged his attention, a detail so small, so insignificant, that it had been overlooked by everyone else. It was a tiny, almost invisible smudge on the polished marble floor, a faint discoloration that was inconsistent with the rest of the scene. It was nothing, a random mark, a trick of the light. But to Martin, it was a loose thread, a tiny tear in the fabric of the seemingly perfect accident. It was a clue, and it was enough to convince him that Bart Covington's death was no accident. It was murder. Elena's world had shrunk to the size of her guilt. The news of Mr. Covington's death and the mention of the allergy medication had sent a chill of terror down her spine. She had checked the hotel's records, and her heart had stopped. The medication she had delivered was not the one he had requested. It was a powerful sedative, a drug that was known to have adverse reactions with alcohol. She was responsible. She had killed him. The thought was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. And so, she began to lie. She deleted the record of the pharmacy delivery. She altered the time of her visit to the penthouse suite. She created a new narrative, a new truth, a new reality, where she was just an innocent bystander. It was a web of lies, a fragile and intricate construction, and she was a spider, trapped in her own creation. Martin and Tonya watched the Covington family from a distance, their table at the hotel's Riverside Cafe a perfect vantage point for their unofficial investigation. The family was a tableau of carefully curated grief, a performance for the benefit of the public. The widow, her face a mask of sorrow, was already on the phone with her lawyer. The son, his expression a study in solemnity, was already making plans to take over the company. The daughter, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, seemed to be the only one who was genuinely upset. And the brother, his face a mixture of grief and something else, something that looked suspiciously like relief. It was a masterclass in deception, a symphony of insincerity. And Martin and Tonya were the only ones who seemed to be listening to the discordant notes. Martin, armed with his suspicions and his microscopic clue, approached the lead detective on the case, a man named Rodriguez. He was a seasoned veteran of the San Antonio police force, a man who had seen it all. He listened patiently to Martin's theories, his expression a mixture of amusement and annoyance. He was not impressed by the vacationing detective from Southeast Texas, and he was not about to reopen a case that was already closed. But Martin was persistent. He didn't mention the smudge on the floor, knowing that it would sound like a wild goose chase. Instead, he pointed out the inconsistencies in the family's statements, the lack of genuine grief, the subtle signs of a family at war. Rodriguez was still skeptical, but Martin's confidence and the undeniable logic of his observations piqued his interest. He didn't officially reopen the case, but he didn't turn Martin away either. He gave him a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement that he would look into it. It was a small victory, but it was a start. While Martin was busy with the human element of the case, Tonya was in her element, the world of numbers and financial data. With a few clicks of her keyboard, she had accessed the Covington family's public financial records, and what she found was a story of a business empire on the brink of collapse. There were signs of massive debt, of risky investments, of a desperate attempt to keep the company afloat. It was a financial house of cards, and it was about to come crashing down. Bart Covington's death, and the massive insurance payout that came with it, was the only thing that could save the company from ruin. Tonya had found the motive, a motive that was as old as time itself: money. Detective Rodriguez, his skepticism now tinged with a grudging respect for Martin's insights, arranged for informal interviews with the Covington family. The first to be questioned was the widow, Isabella Covington. She was a vision of sorrow, her designer black dress a stark contrast to her sun-kissed skin. She spoke of her love for Bart, her voice a soft, trembling whisper. But as Tonya listened, her mind a calculator of human behavior, she noticed the inconsistencies. Isabella's grief was a performance, her tears a carefully rehearsed act. She spoke of her husband's generosity, but her eyes, for a fleeting moment, darted to the diamond bracelet on her wrist, a gift from a man she claimed to love, a man whose death had just made her one of the richest women in Texas. She was a black widow, her web a silken trap of lies and deception. Next came the son, Bartholomew Covington, Jr., a man who wore his ambition like a tailored suit. He spoke of his father with a mixture of reverence and resentment, his words a carefully constructed tribute to a man he had both admired and despised. He spoke of his father's legacy, of his duty to carry on the family name, but his eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed his true intentions. He was a man who had been waiting in the wings, a prince eager to usurp the throne. He saw his father's death not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a chance to finally step out of his father's shadow and into the spotlight. He was a man who would do anything to get what he wanted, and what he wanted was everything. While the interviews were underway, Martin was on a digital ghost hunt. He had a hunch that the killer had left a footprint in the hotel's network, a faint echo in the vastness of cyberspace. He started with the hotel's smart home system, a sophisticated network that controlled everything from the lights to the locks. It was a digital fortress, a seemingly impenetrable wall of code. But Martin was a master of his craft. He had a knack for finding the cracks in the armor, the vulnerabilities in the system. And then he found it. A digital anomaly, a ghost in the machine. It was a single, unauthorized command, a command that had been sent to the smart home system in Bart Covington's suite just moments before his death. The command had overridden the system's safety protocols, turning the suite into a death trap. It was a long shot, but it was the first real evidence they had. The estranged daughter, Clara, was a breath of fresh air in the stuffy atmosphere of the Covington family. She was a woman who had chosen love over money, a decision that had cost her her inheritance. She spoke of her father with a mixture of anger and sadness, her words a raw and honest portrayal of a complicated relationship. She had loved her father, but she had hated what he had become. She had mourned the loss of her family, but she had found a new one in the arms of the man she loved. She was a woman of integrity, a woman who had nothing to gain from her father's death. Or so it seemed. Elena's world was unraveling. The guilt of her mistake was a constant, gnawing presence, a shadow that followed her every move. And then came the note. It was slipped under her door, a single, folded piece of paper. The words were simple, but their meaning was as sharp as a knife. "I know what you did." The blood drained from her face, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Someone knew. Someone was watching her. The web of lies she had so carefully constructed was about to be torn apart. She was no longer just a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She was a target. The final interview was with Bart's younger brother, a man named Walter. He was a man who had lived his life in the shadow of his brother's success, a man whose resentment was as deep as the Texas oil wells that had made his family rich. He spoke of his brother with a mixture of admiration and envy, his words a carefully veiled attack on a man he had both loved and hated. He was a man who had been waiting for his moment, a man who was tired of being second best. He was a man with a motive, a man with a grudge, a man who had everything to gain from his brother's death. As the interviews concluded, Tonya was busy with her own investigation, a deep dive into the family's alibis, and what she found was a series of inconsistencies, a collection of half-truths and outright lies. The widow, who claimed to be at a spa, had made a secret trip back to the city. The son, who claimed to be in a business meeting, had a 2-hour window of unaccounted time. The brother, who claimed to be at a charity event, had left early. The alibis, once as solid as the Texas bedrock, were now as fragile as a house of cards. The family was a nest of vipers, and they were all hiding something. Martin's digital ghost had led them to a dead end. The unauthorized command, the one that had turned the suite into a death trap, was a red herring, a clever misdirection to lead the investigation astray. The command had been sent from a public computer in the hotel's business center, a computer that was accessible to anyone. It was a brilliant move, a way to create a digital footprint that would lead nowhere. The killer was not just a murderer, but a master of deception, a puppeteer who was pulling all the strings. The night of the murder, a different perspective. The ambitious son, Bartholomew Jr., is seen arguing with his father, their voices a low, angry rumble. The son storms out of the suite, his face a mask of fury. A few moments later, the estranged daughter Clara is seen knocking on the door, her face a mixture of hope and trepidation. She enters the suite, and the door closes behind her. The camera pans to the hallway, where the scheming brother, Walter, is seen lurking in the shadows, a silent observer to the family drama. The web of lies was more tangled than they had ever imagined. With the alibis in tatters and the family's secrets laid bare, the San Antonio police, now under the guidance of a grudgingly impressed Detective Rodriguez, officially declared Bart Covington's death a homicide, and their prime suspect was the young concierge, Elena Ramirez. She was the one who had delivered the fatal medication, the one who had been in the suite just moments before the murder. The evidence against her was circumstantial, but it was enough. The pressure was mounting, the walls were closing in, and Elena was about to be arrested for a crime she didn't commit. Martin stood on the balcony of his hotel room, the humid night air doing little to cool his racing thoughts. The digital ghost was a dead end, a deliberate misdirection. The medication was the delivery system, but not the cause. He replayed the crime scene in his mind, the open balcony doors, the faint smudge on the floor. It wasn't a substance, he realized, but an absence. The room's smart home system, which regulated air quality, had been momentarily disabled. The smudge wasn't something added, but something removed. A spot wiped clean of the fine layer of city dust that coated everything else. The killer hadn't brought a weapon into the room. They had turned the room itself into one. By disabling the air circulation and introducing a common, but potent, allergen into the sealed environment, They had triggered a fatal allergic reaction in a man whose specific, severe allergy was a closely guarded secret. It was a murder designed to look like an accident, a drowning in air. While Martin was deciphering the physical crime, Tonya was navigating the labyrinth of the Covington family's finances. The company was bleeding money, but it was more than just bad investments. Tonya discovered a complex scheme of embezzlement, a secret pipeline siphoning millions into an offshore account. The account was untraceable, a digital fortress. But Tonya, with her obsessive precision, found a single, recurring anomaly, a series of microtransactions disguised as routine expenses, all originating from a single IP address. The address was linked to a private server, and the server was registered to one person, Walter Covington, the quiet, overlooked brother. He wasn't just resentful, he was actively robbing the family blind. Bart must have discovered the fraud, which provided the immediate motive for his murder. Detective Rodriguez, now fully convinced of foul play, brought Elena in for questioning. The pressure was immense. Seeing no way out, she broke down, confessing to Martin, who was present for the interview, about her mistake with the medication. She explained her panic, the lies, the desperate attempt to cover her tracks. As Martin listened, the pieces clicked into place. Elena's story was the key, but not in the way the police believed. She wasn't the killer. She was the perfect scapegoat. Her genuine mistake with the medication provided the ideal cover story, a plausible explanation for the death that would draw all suspicion to her and away from the real murderer. The killer hadn't just anticipated a mistake, they had engineered the circumstances to make it inevitable. Martin now saw the full picture. The killer knew about Bart's severe, secret allergy. They knew about Elena's diligence and her tendency to go above and beyond for guests. They had orchestrated the entire scenario. The late-night request for a rare medication, ensuring the hotel's pharmacy would be closed, forcing Elena to use an outside courier. They had then intercepted the delivery, swapping the correct medication for the sedative, knowing it would create a confusing and suspicious element. Finally, they had disabled the air system and introduced the allergen, timing it perfectly to coincide with Elena's delivery. With the truth finally in his grasp, Martin knew he had to act quickly. He presented his findings to Detective Rodriguez, who, after a moment of stunned silence, agreed to Martin's audacious plan. They would gather the Covington family, along with Elena, for a final meeting, a dramatic denouement, in the style of the classic detective novels Martin so admired. The stage would be set, the players assembled, and the truth, in all its ugly glory, would be revealed. The storm that had been brewing over the San Antonio River Walk was about to break. The private dining room at Boudreaux's, a restaurant renowned for its tableside guacamole and its stunning views of the river walk, was the chosen setting for the final act. The Covington family arrived one by one, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Elena was there too, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a newfound fragile hope. Martin stood at the head of the table, a quiet commander in the heart of the storm. Tonya was by his side, her presence a silent source of strength and support. The air was thick with tension, the clinking of silverware and the distant laughter from the river below a stark contrast to the drama that was about to unfold. Martin began his story, his voice calm and measured. He spoke of the smudge on the floor, the disabled air system, the secret allergy. He dismantled the alibis, one by one, exposing the lies and deceptions of the Covington family. He spoke of the financial fraud, the millions of dollars siphoned into a secret account. He painted a picture of a family consumed by greed, a family where loyalty was a commodity and murder was just another business transaction. The family listened, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning comprehension. The web of lies was unraveling, and the spider was about to be revealed. And then, Martin delivered the final, devastating blow. He turned to the one person who had seemed the most genuine, the most heartbroken, the one person who had seemingly nothing to gain from Bart's death. He turned to Clara, the disinherited daughter. It was she who had known about her father's secret allergy, she who had orchestrated the entire charade. Her motive was not money, but revenge. Revenge for a lifetime of emotional abuse, for the disinheritance, for the father who had never truly loved her. She had used her knowledge of the family's dynamics to her advantage, pitting them against each other, creating a smokescreen of suspicion that would hide her own guilt. Clara, her face a mask of cold fury, did not deny it. She confessed to everything, her voice a chilling monotone. She spoke of her hatred for her father, of her desire to see him suffer. She had planned the murder for years, waiting for the perfect opportunity. She had used Elena as a pawn, a disposable piece in her game of chess. She had framed her own family, knowing that their greed and their secrets would make them the perfect suspects. It was a confession of a heart turned to stone, a soul consumed by a thirst for revenge. It was the confession of a monster. As the police led Clara away, a stunned silence fell over the room. The Covington family, their faces a mixture of shock and shame, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Elena, her name cleared, was free to go, her future a blank canvas waiting to be painted. As the sun set over the San Antonio Riverwalk, casting a golden glow on the water, Martin and Tonya stood on the balcony of their hotel room, the city lights twinkling below. They had come for a vacation, a respite from the darkness of their work. But the darkness had found them, as it always did. And as they stood there, in the warm embrace of the Texas night, they knew that their work was not just a job, but a calling, a never-ending battle against the shadows that lurked in the human heart.